This is a true story for the island of Westray, where my mother came from. And I've heard the story for her, and I've seen it for other folk too, of course. But there was a wee connection between that and my family as well, which I'll tell you at the end. It's a story called The Wreck of the Archangel. Now, it was in the 1730s on the island of Westray, and there was a terrible gale blowing. And at the wee cottages of Sequoia, the Rendell woman that lived there, Rendell was their surname, she sat by the fire, and with a little bit of light that came from the cruisy lamp, she was busy knitting away and trying to keep warm, when the door opened and in came her husband, and he said, "There's a big ship heading towards the rocks down at Ramagale. I'm going to go next door and get chock of wheaning stains and go down and see if there's anything we can do." "We'll be careful," she said, "it's no a night to be out on." "Aye, I ken," he says, "I ken, lass, I'll take care." And sure enough, he gaed next door to get the neighbour, and he gaed down to the shore, and there was the ship, and she was in a terrible condition. Some of the masts had snapped, and the sails were torn, and she was completely at the mercy of the tide, and she was being drawn towards the skerries, towards the rocks. And there was not a thing that people could do. They could just watch on helpless, but there was no way that they could have launched a small boat and got out to that ship that night. Now, on board the ship, the crew were panicking. They were running around frantically. They knew that their last day had dawned. And on the ship there was a woman, and she had a small boy, a wee bairn. Now, this woman, well, people say it was the captain's wife, but I don't know how they could know that. But this woman knew that the ship was doomed. There was not a thing that they could do to save themselves. And so she decided that rather than stay on a splintering, shattered ship, she would take her chances in the roaring sea. And she tied her wee son close to her breast, using her shawl. She tied him tight, and then she jumped over the side of the ship into the foaming, raging sea. At that moment the ship struck the rocks, and it tore the side out of that vessel, and the waves pounded it, and it was broken to matchsticks. Now, the folk standing on the shore couldn't do a thing to help. They just stood and watched, utterly helpless. And eventually, as it was dark, they went home. Well, the next morning, when the sun rose, they were back at the shore again. They knew that nobody could have survived in that sea. So they were down to see what they could glean from the wreck. You know, one person's disaster is another one's good fortune. There's no trees on Westray. There's no wood. Wood is scarce. So a broken up ship would provide timber that you could make all sorts of things from. Everything from a cradle to a bed to a coffin would be made from the wood. And also there was sailcloth and rope to be picked up, which was very useful as well. And whatever cargo the ship was carrying, anything that was of any use was carried up above the high water mark and laid there. That means you'd claimed it. To take anything from above high water mark is tantamount to theft. That's how I was brought up too. Well, every now and again they would find a body, usually in a bad state, mangled with the terrible waves beaten on the rock. And they would pull the body up for a decent burial later. You never buried the dead from the sea, the sailors. They were never buried in the kirkyard. The sea claims its prey, and the sea will come and try to flood the kirkyard to get them back. So you bury dead sailors by the side of the shore. You bury them on the links, and that's what they were going to do. Now, the man of Sequoia was wandering along when he saw lying there in the surf, there was another body. And when he went over to look, it was a woman. And he thought, it's a terrible thing to see. And then he noticed, worse than ever, there was a small child tied to her. And that touched his heart. And then the bairn made a slight noise, just faint but a slight cry. And the man untied the shawl and he took the bairn up, and it was alive, only just. But it was alive, unlike its mother. And so he ran with the bairn back to Sequoia, back as fast as he could, and he gave it to his wife. And she got the bairn stripped down, she dried him off, she wrapped him in blankets and sat him by the side of the fire to warm up. She rubbed his wee feet and hands to get the warmth back into him. She warmed up some milk and gave it to him to drink. Now they didn't know anything about this child. They had no idea who he was, where he came from. They knew nothing about the ship. And if he could speak any words at all, this wee boy, it was not in a language that was understood to anybody in Westray. The only clue of the ship was that the man of Sequoia had found a piece of wood and had writing on it. But that didn't help him much because he was illiterate. So he brought it to the minister to read. The minister looked at it and said, "It says Archangel. It must have been a Russian ship. This must have been its port of registration. Archangel, in the north of Russia." Well, that gave the man something. Because they didn't know who this wee boy was. They didn't know what his name was. But the ship had given him a name, and they called him Archangel. And Archangel grew up to be a fine, strong young man. And he married and had a family. And for a long time after that, there were angels in the island of Westray. Now that's normally where the story finishes, but my mother was born in Westray in 1922. So her parents were born in the 1880s, my grandparents. I was born in 1963. I was an afterthought, old enough to have known better, as I always say. But anyway, my grandparents were born in the 1880s. And my grandfather, Geordie Draver, was a crofter, and he was a fisherman as well. He went out to sea in a boat. And they said that he knew the sea, he could read the sky. He had a great depth of knowledge, which is all long gone now. Anyway, the last person to bear the name of Angel in Westray was a woman called Mary Angel. Now there had been a lot of girls in the family, so they were married, they had families of their own, but the name Angel had died out. Mary was the last. And when she married a man called Henry Mason, then the name disappeared from the families in Westray. Now, my mother used to say that Mary Angel was what she described as a corset body. My mental picture always of her was Boris Yeltsin in a headscarf and pinny. Now, she had a son, also called Henry, who was at school with my grandfather, Geordie Draver. They were in the same class together. Now, at that time, they had a teacher who was very, very strict. And if they did anything that he didn't approve of, if they stepped out of line just so much as a tiny bit, then he would take them, keep them in after school and make them do extra work. Detention, they call it these days. I don't know what they called it. Probably nothing as polite as that, though, the bairns. But they were sitting there doing arithmetic, with the slates and the slate pencils, and they're all going scratching away on their slate and rubbing it out if they make a mistake, when they could hear a mutter, 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 mutter coming up the close. And the door opens and in walks Mary Angel, and she says to the teacher, "Where's me boy?" "He is being kept back," said the teacher, "because they have been bad today, so they are being punished." "Will his tea's ready?" she said. And she went to get her son. Now the teacher, educated man though he was, did a very stupid thing, because any fool knows that you do not get between a wild animal and its young. And that's what he did. He got in front of the bairn and tried to stop Mary Angel. Mary just up with a fist and smacked him in the face. Down he went like a sack of tatties. Well, that wasn't enough for Mary. Oh no, she got him by the scruff of the neck, and she dadded his head off the floor until she knocked him out, stone cold. And then she grabbed the bairn by the arm and dragged him out the door and slammed it. The bairns were horrified. "Oh my God, Mary Angel's killed the teacher. What sort of detention will we get for that?" They had pictures of themselves, these boys with long flowing beards, still doing long division on their slates. Well, he was lying there, a trickle of blood coming out of his ear. And one of the boys, who was slightly braver than the others, went and got a glass of water and splashed it on the man's face. The teacher's eyes flickered open, and in a weak voice he said, "Get me a glass of water, boys." So they went and they got him a glass of water, and he took a drink and he said, "Class dismissed." Well, they didn't need a second telling. They were out that door like a shot. And after that, Mary Angel became a bit of a hero among the bairns in Westray, because, you see, after that, that teacher never kept them back in detention again. Now, this is a wee story for Westray that my mother told me. Now, it's called the Sheep Thives. But I really should kind of give you the background to this, because my mother was born on the 1st of July, 1922, so she would be 98 this year if she was still with us. And in 1995, her sister died, Mimo. No, Mimo Rendell, or Jemima, as you would know it, but we said Mimo as shortened version. She was living on her own. She was a widow, and when she died, my mother decided to go up and sort out the funeral arrangements, and I went with her to help. And as we were sailing north, we were passing the island of Ferry, North Ferry, and my mother, standing on the side of the boat, said a wee rhyme. I'm going to read it to you here. I have it written in a wee book that I published about stories for Westray. And it's called The Fairy Hooses. Not fairy as in granting wishes and stuff, but fairy as in Sheep Island. Quai caught dogger bought hammer in the ha, le quai Ness Holland windy wa, and that's a. Now that's the names of all the hooses on the island of Ferry, from the north to the south. And I'd never heard her coming up with things like this before. And she started to tell stories. Now, she always told me that she didn't know any stories. You know, do you know any folk tales? No, don't know any art ones. She had no interest in them, seen no point in them. And there was a great deal of hostility, really, among older folk against folk tales when I first started gathering them and trying to get them back out in front of the public again. And my mother was no exception, really. But she told me this story. But the thing was, it was a true story, she said. She was absolutely determined. This is a true story. Now, long ago, there was a lot of sheep stealing going on all through the islands. And a lot of the time they like to pin it on the travelling folk. But, of course, they were a convenient excuse. I dare say that there was a few ended up in their pot as well, but they were good scapegoats. And sheep would be going missing, and you could easily blame it on somebody travelling through the area. Well, on this occasion there was a group of sheep thieves, 3 of them, that were working out of Pirawal, which is the main village in the island of Westray. And in the middle of the village there is Ladykirk, a church dedicated to St. Mary. And that's where my ancestors are buried. My grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, etc., etc. Anyway, the graveyard was a good place to operate in if you were a sheep thief, because who would be going in the graveyard at night? There was a great deal of superstition about ghosts, and people were too scared to go anywhere near a graveyard in case there was a ghost lurking around. Now, there was a group of young men, teenagers, just boys really, and they were all kind of daring each other. Would you go into the graveyard at the dark of night, around midnight? No, they wouldn't do that. I bet you wouldn't. Well, no, I wouldn't, So there was bets going on, but, nobody would take up the offer. Everybody was scared to go in there. But there was one young man who came up to join them, and he had been crippled since he was a child, so he went around on a couple of sticks, but he had a great deal of trouble moving around. So he came up anyway, and he says to them, "Well, boys, what's the news tonight?" "Oh, we were just speaking about ghosts." "Ghosts? Oh, why, what about ghosts?" "Well, I bet you wouldn't go into the graveyard at midnight, would you?" "Yes, I would," he said. He, of course, had no intention of doing it, but he didn't want to seem to be a coward in front of all these guys. "Oh, yes, I would, but unfortunately I couldn't because, of course, I'm on sticks here, I can't walk properly, and it's very uneven ground, so no, I couldn't do it. I wouldn't be able to make it then." "We'll carry you," they said. "Ah, yeah, we'll carry you into the graveyard and leave you there." Well, the young lad didn't like the idea that much at all, and of course he was scared of ghosts. But he couldn't let himself be seen to be scared. So in the end he had to go along with it. So the 2 of them picked him up and carried him towards the gate of the kirkyard. Now meanwhile, one of the sheep thieves was in the kirkyard, hiding behind the gravestone, because he was waiting for his pals to come back. They would take them down to the kirkyard there, and then they would, gut them and get them all sort of sorted out. But anyway, he was waiting there, and he heard the sound of the gate opening, and the sound of 2 people coming in carrying something, a heavy weight between them. And he said from behind this gravestone, "Is he fat, boys? Is he fat?" Well, the 2 young men, when they heard that, they dropped the poor cripple boy and they legged it. They ran out as fast as they could. But they said no matter how fast they ran, the cripple boy was home before them. Now my mother explained to me who this boy was, that he was the grandfather of so-and-so and such like. The whole genealogy was there, and it made it legitimate to tell that story because it wasn't a folk tale. But I have found the same story in another part of Orkney, and in the Western Isles, and in the Scottish Highlands. So it's a story that has done the rounds. But she always maintained, no, that was a true story. I'll leave it up to you to decide. Now this story that I'm going to tell you is based on a real person. So I have no idea whether the story is true or not. It's how the story has been passed down over the centuries. But it did happen to a real woman in the 1630s on the island of Westray. Now that's the island where my mother came from, so it's a story that's well known among folk on the island. Now there was a young man called Benjamin Garrick, and he was getting his boat ready one fine summer's day to go to the fishing. Him and the neighbouring men were all gathering together the gear, and they were getting the boat ready to push down into the sea, go to the fishing, when he saw that there was a figure walking along the beach towards them, and he recognised the figure. It was his girlfriend, Janet Forsyth. Well, at least he thought she was his girlfriend. To be honest, he wasn't really sure, because sometimes she was really keen on him, and then other times she would hardly give him the time of day. She just blew hot and cold the whole time. So he didn't really know, but he hoped that she was, because, he liked her. Well, this day, Jeanette was very, very strange. So she acted in a way that Benjamin had never seen before. She went up to him and she said, "Benji, don't go to the fishing today." "Why not?" Just don't go." But why?" "Look, I can't tell you," she said, but just don't go to the fishing today. Please stay at home." "But why? Why should I stay at home? I can't let the guys down. We have to work together." "Look," she said, "I had a dream last night, and I dreamt that if you went to the fishing today, then something terrible would happen, and you would never return. So please, Benji, please don't go to the fishing." Well, he laughed, a kind of a hollow laugh, and he said, but why? Look at that sky. There's not a cloud in it. Sun shining. It's a fine day. Couldn't be better. What could possibly go wrong on such a day as this?" And then, to his amazement, she just burst into tears, and she hung on his neck, and she wept into his shoulder, and she said, "Don't leave me, Benji, don't leave me." And then she turned around, and she ran away, sobbing, along the shore. And his friends just looked at him, and Benji just shrugged his shoulders. And then they pushed the boat down the beach and into the sea, and they hoisted the sail, and away they went. And they were never seen again on the island of Westray. But what could go wrong on such a day as that? Fog. You see, Orkney lies between two bodies of water. The Atlantic Ocean is on the west, but on the east there is the North Sea. And the North Sea waters are cold and frigid. And so, on a hot summer's day, the warm air from the land mixes with the cold air from the sea, and it turns to fog. And that fog can roll in as fast as a freight train. And that's what happened that day. The boat was at sea, it was swallowed up by fog, and they never came back. Now, if that wasn't bad enough for poor Janet, things just got worse, because her mother had died a long time before, but she lived with her father, who was a fisherman. But he took ill suddenly and died, and she was left all alone in a small tumble-down cottage with nothing but a boat down in the boat-mast. Now, Janet knew a thing or two about herbal remedies. She knew plants that could cure ailments, and she could make up potions, and she could make up ointments, and people went to her for help when they were ailing. But people started to notice the change in her. I mean, she wasn't going out much. She wasn't mixing with people. She wasn't friendly anymore. She didn't want people's company. And so people started to stay away from her too. And the local bairns started to spy on her. And at night they would climb up on the roof of her wee house and they would look down the smoke hole and they could see her sitting by the side of the fire. And she cut a tragic figure. She sat by the side of the fire with her arms wrapped around herself and rocking backwards and forwards and always singing a sad song to herself. The song that she sang was a lament for lost love. Well, people shunned her and kept away from her, but there was something else that she did which made people feel very uneasy. Because when the winds rose and the sea started to thunder and roar, she would slip away from her cottage and she would run down to the boathouse by the shore and she would push that small boat of her father's down into the sea. And she would hoist the sail and away she would go, in weather that nobody would dare to take a boat out in. But she always came back, soaking wet but safe and sound. That boat weathered all the storms, and she managed to pull it with sheer determination up to the boathouse where it would be sheltered, and then she would go home, and she would sit by the side of the fire, and she would hug herself, and she would sing her sad songs. Well, there was a new word that started to appear on people's lips when they spoke about Jeanette Forsyth, and the word was witch. Well, of course she's a witch. I mean, did she not say that on young Benji Garrick that she was sweet on? She said that he would be lost at sea, and sure enough he did. Well, what happened there, I wonder? And the fact that she goes out in all that storms in a boat and survives? Aye, I think she raises the storms herself. Aye, I think so too. Yeah, I bet that she actually goes out to the sea and communes with the devil himself out in the middle of that storm. That's what she does. Sure enough. Aye, they'll watch out for her. Witch. She's a witch. Keep away for her. Witch. Janet used to hear these rumours being spread as well, but she paid no attention. She didn't care. They could call her what she liked. Well, things went on like that for a while. But one day, events stepped in and it all came to a head. You see, there was a bark, a sailing ship, was caught in a storm, a terrible raging storm, and it was driven towards the rocks of Westray. And the folk gathered down on the shore to watch it. Now, there wasn't a lot that they thought that they could do anyway, but someone's misfortune was another one's good luck. If a ship went on the rocks in Westray, well, there was plenty of driftwood coming ashore in an island with no wood. That was valuable. And all the sails and the ropes and all that too, and whatever cargo she was carrying would come ashore. And people were standing down there and they were waiting eagerly for the ship to strike the rocks and break up. They were waiting to see what precious cargoes was inside. They were waiting for that timber to be wafted ashore. And Janet Forsyth went down next to them and she looked at them with contempt and she goes, "Aren't you going to try to help?" There was no reply. People cast a black look on her and then carried on staring hungrily at the ship. Janet just shook her head and away she went. She went to her father's boathouse. She grabbed it and she dragged it down to the shore. She pushed it into the waves and it was a struggle to get it launched because the waves that were breaking on the shore were so strong it just pushed the boat back around again. But eventually, sheer determination, she managed to get that small boat into the sea. And she pulled up the sail and she tacked away and she sailed into that teeth of that gale towards that ship that was in distress. Well, the people watched her with disbelief, and they could see this tiny, frail boat of hers climbing up a huge wave and then down the other side into the abyss. But then after a while they would see that tiny little boat climbing up another wave, over the top and then down the trough on the other side, down into the watery abyss, and people would say, well, she's gone now. There's no way the boat can weather a wave like that. But there it was again, climbing another wave, down the other side, and that boat climbed wave after wave after wave until it got alongside the ship. Janet tied the boat to the side of the ship, and she climbed up on the deck, and she started to shout orders to the crew. The captain of the ship was so amazed. Where the hell did she come from? But he was desperate, and she had an air of authority about her, like someone that knew what they were talking about, and she did. Her father was a fisherman. She had been taken out on that boat since she was just a bairn, and she knew every tide around the island and where every rock was, every skerry, every danger. And so she managed to get the boat to tack that ship, to tack away from the rocks, and she got it into a piece of better water where the tide took it around the headland, and eventually the boat was able to get into the safety of Pierwell Bay. And once it was in the shelter of Pierwell, it dropped the anchor and the boat was saved. That ship was safe. The captain said, "My dear girl, I have no idea who you are, where you came from, but you've saved our lives. Everyone on this ship owes you their lives. Now, I don't have much, but I have here a bag of money. I would like you to take it. Please take this as a small token of our eternal gratitude to you for what you did." But Janet just shook her head. No, thank you, she said. No, you see, I had a love once, and he was lost at sea. And I would hope that if he was in danger, if his life was in peril, that someone would come to his aid too and help him, just the way that I helped you. So no, thank you. I don't want your money. And she climbed down the side of the ship and into her own little boat, and she untied it and she headed back towards her own boat-mast. She dragged the boat up, went back home and sat by the fire, and she sang her sad songs. Now these days, if somebody did that, you get a medal or something. You'd get some sort of a scroll to put on your wall, but not in the 1630s you didn't. All it did was confirm people's beliefs that she was a witch. She must be in league with the devil to have saved that ship. Also, she'd cheated them of the ship as well, and all the goods that were in it. So she was denounced to the church, and she was arrested, and she was taken to Kirkwall, to the great cathedral of St. Magnus, where she was held in a cell to await her trial. Now on the day of her trial, she was brought in front of all the great and the good of Kirkwall, who would pass judgment on her, and all the people turned up to hear the evidence as well. And the evidence came from folk in Westray. There was the usual stories of animals going sick or cows stopping milking, and it was all her fault, of course. There was even a man that said that he went to sea one day and he became sick. He felt sick. And so they headed back to the shore, and he saw Janet Forsyth down at the shore, and he accused her of using her witchcraft to make him feel sick when he was at sea. And she had a bucket in her hand, and she scooped up a bucket of salt water from the sea, and she threw it over him, and he felt better after that. Now, it's enough to make you laugh, isn't it? But it was no laughing matter in the 1630s. No, that was enough to have you convicted. And the judge declared that she was guilty as charged of the crime of witchcraft. "You have anything to say before I pass judgment on you?" he said. "No," said Janet. "I have nothing to say to you, because I don't care. I no longer care. You can do whatever you want to me. I don't care. You see, I've done no harm. I've done no wrong. And, when I put to sea in my boat, well, I always hoped, beyond hope, that someday I might find the love that I had lost at sea. But I never did. And if any power protected me when I was in the storms at the sea, it was God, not devil. But now you can do what you want with me. I've had enough of life. I have no fear of death. So do your worst." The judge, he was not happy with a statement like that. He said, "Well, there is only one punishment suitable for such a crime. You'll be bound by your hand and feet, and you'll be taken to the head of the loan, where you'll be worried at the stake, and then your body burnt to ashes, and God have mercy on your soul." To be worried at the stake meant that you were tied to a stake, and then a rope was put around your neck by the hangman, who twisted it and turned it until you were strangled to death, and then your body burnt to ashes. The crowd there were not sympathetic. "Hey, burn the witch! Burn the witch!" they cried. And there was a crowd of sailors had just come in at the door as well, Royal Naval men that had sheltered from a storm. And they were shouting, burn the witch," along with all the other people. And she looked towards them, and then suddenly her face went as white as a sheet, and she said, Benji, save me, Benji." One of the sailors ran towards her, and she fainted. He picked her up off the ground. He hugged her. He kissed her. He called her his love. The judge was furious. "Unhand the prisoner at once," he said. "God, if it wasn't for the fact that you were serving in His Majesty's Navy and fighting against our enemies, I would have you tried for contempt of court." And poor Janet was dragged along the floor of the cathedral, crying out, "Benji, save me, Benji." Now that night in Kirkwall there was great celebrations. You see, the Royal Navy ships were sheltering from that same storm that almost wrecked the ship in Westray, and they had put into Kirkwall Bay and anchored there. Now the local lairds, all the big landowners, they'd invited the officers of the ships to come and dine with them, and there was lots of claret and port was drunk, and also, I dare say, quite a bit of smuggled French brandy and smuggled Dutch gin was consumed too, so that they started to get rather merry and also feeling a bit generous. So they had ordered that barrels of beer should be opened in front of the cathedral and dished out to the local people and to the sailors who were ashore. Well, free booze? No Arcadian's going to turn that down, and no Royal Naval sailor either. They were all drinking it just like a cool drinking a bucket of water on a hot day. Well, the next morning they had the witch burning to look forward to as well. It would be a great excitement. The next day there would have been a few sore heads in Kirkwall and a few mouths that felt like they were full of ashes, but they went up at the appointed time to the cathedral to watch the witch being taken out and led to the top of the lawn where she would be strangled at the stake, worried and burnt to ashes. But somebody came running out of the cathedral in a panic, shouting, "The witch is gone! She's gone! She's not there! She's gone!" People ran in, and sure enough, there was the cell door standing wide open, and the jailer who was meant to be guarding it was slumped in a chair, sound asleep. Well, they searched high and low. Kirkwall was scoured, and all the surrounding area was searched, but there was not a trace of the Westray storm witch, Janet Forsyth. Not a thing. Now, years passed, and there was one of those lairds, those big landowners who lived in Kirkwall. He was a bakey of Tankermas. They lived at Tankermas House, which is now the museum. And his business as a merchant took him down to the city of Manchester. He was walking along the street in Manchester when he saw a shop sign saying Benjamin Garrick, and he thought, well, there's a name that you find in Orkney too. I wonder if this is an Orkney person. I'll go in and have a look. So he went in, and to his amazement, who was standing behind the counter but Janet Forsyth, the Westray storm wench. "Ah, you're Janet Forsyth, aren't you?" he said. Well, the poor girl, her face went white as a sheet. "Benji," she shouted. "Benjamin." A man came through from the back of the shop. Well, he'd recognized her all right, but she'd changed. She'd put on weight for a start, and also she looked about 20 years younger than the pathetic, careworn, sad woman that he saw in the cathedral standing trial. So he asked what had happened, and Benjamin took up the story. He said that summer's day in Westray he'd gone to sea all right in the boat, and the fog had rolled in and swallowed them up, and they couldn't see where to go at all. They had no idea where they were, and that's a dangerous thing to be, because they could end up on a skerry, broken on the rocks and lost at sea and drowned. People never learnt to swim in those days, so they wouldn't have lasted long. Or they could have drifted out into the Atlantic Ocean and away and lost, and when the fog lifted there might be no sign of land at all, and so they would have been lost as well. So they very, very cautiously went this way and that. They took the sail on, they rowed gently this way, that, until they saw a dark shape in the distance, and they headed towards it, and they could see it was a ship. So they went alongside, but it was only when they got alongside the ship did they realize what it was. To their horror, it was a man-of-war, a Royal Navy warship. They were taken on board, and they were press-ganged into the Navy and made to serve on board the ship. And they fought in battles, and they sailed here, there, and everywhere. And they were caught in the same storm that the boat, the ship that Janet had saved, had been caught in. And they had put into Kirkwall. Well, the next day Benji had gone ashore with some of his friends, and they could see people walking into the cathedral, and they thought, wonder what's going on there. So they went in to have a look. Curious, you know. And sure enough, there was a witch trial, and the verdict had just been passed, and everybody was shouting, "Burn the witch, burn the witch," and they joined in too. And then, to his horror, when the witch turned around, he saw that it was his sweetheart, his own beloved, Janet Forsyth. And, of course, she was pulled away to the dungeon, to the cells, and locked up. Well, he decided that he had to do something to try to save her. Now, the captain of the ship that she'd saved was in Kirkwall as well. It was also lying anchored safely in Kirkwall Bay at that time. You see, the captain of the ship had wanted to give evidence on behalf of Chinnet, but he was not allowed to, because they said that he must be bewitched by her, and so his testimony was not legal. It was not worth listening to, so he was dismissed. But he wanted to help, and so Benjamin asked if they could come up with a plan between them, and they did. Now that night they knew that the jailer, he liked a dram or two as well, so they waited until that beer was being dished out, and they took beer into the cathedral and gave it to the jailer, and he drank and he drank and he drank. Now maybe they put something in the ale to make him sleep. Maybe he just drank so much he didn't need anything to make him sleep. But sleep he did. Well, when he was asleep, all they had to do was just take the keys and unlock the door and take her out. The captain of the ship took her away up over the brae towards Inverness Bay. And there the ship was lying safely anchored waiting for her. Benji hugged her and said that he would see her soon, but he had to go back to his ship, because if he disappeared, people would get suspicious. So he left her in the safekeeping of the captain of the ship, who sailed away to his home port of Liverpool. And he took her home to meet his wife and his family, and he told them the whole story of what had happened and how he would not be standing there now alive and well in front of them if it wasn't for this poor, wretched girl. And she was taken in and looked after, given dresses and food and taken care of as a member of the family, because she had saved the life of the woman's husband. Well, the Royal Navy ship sailed back down to Portsmouth, and as soon as it got there, Benji jumped ship and he headed towards Liverpool. He had the address of the captain, and he went there and he was reunited with his love, and the two of them were married. Now, the captain of the ship and the owners of the ship had gathered together some money, and they gave to them, and it was a good sum as well. But they decided not to stay in Liverpool. They would head to Manchester and set up a new life there. And with the money they bought a little shop, and they were doing very well for themselves now, away from where no one knew them and no one knew the story of the Westray storm witch. Well, when Bakey heard that, he said, "I've never heard such a story in my life, and I swear to you, I promise, your secret is safe with me. I will not tell a living soul." And obviously he didn't keep his promise, otherwise I wouldn't be able to tell you the story now. But he went home, and he never betrayed the secret to people who might want harm on her, of poor Jeanette Forsyth. And so her and Benji Garrick lived in Manchester, as far as we know, for the rest of their days. And who knows, in the city of Manchester to this day, there may still be descendants of Jeanette Forsyth, the Westray Storm Witch.